as Commander-in-Chief, he has the obligation to help us solve this problem. I ask our colleagues to please support this legislation. Bring transparency. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened carefully to what the Chairman of the Armed Services Committee said, and I didn't find much that I disagree with. We agree that we should replace the sequester. We agree that it's a mistake to create the kind of uncertainty that's out there, and obviously it has an impact not just in the defense sector, but also in all the other areas where our federal government has activities. But I would just say, and I want to make sure the chairman's on the floor now and has a chance to respond, he demonstrated some leadership on this issue last fall because he was asked this question. He was asked if he had to put together a plan that included some revenue. He said, yeah, I understand we got to make cuts, but I'd rather include some revenue than deep cuts to defense. In fact, what he said was, we're going to have to stop repeating ideological talking points and address our budget problems comprehensively through smarter spending and increased revenue, unquote. And when asked whether he would choose between deeper cuts in defense and cutting some tax breaks, he said we should cut some tax breaks. That was last fall. That's exactly the kind of balanced approach that we've put forward, the Democrats put forward in the Budget Committee. The chairman of the committee asked for a specific plan. We had a vote on it in the Budget Committee. We wish that our colleagues would have supported it. It would have prevented the sequester from taking place for another year, eliminated all the uncertainty the chairman of the Armed Services Committee just talked about. The reason that we haven't been able to move forward is our Republican colleagues continue to insist on supporting these tax breaks for special interest and tax breaks for folks at the very top and refuse to eliminate those tax breaks for the purpose of reducing the deficit or for the purpose of eliminating the sequester on defense and non-defense. That's why we're in the situation we are right now. The keys to the lock are in the hands of our Republican colleagues. We had the same proposal ready to bring to a vote before the whole House of Representatives as part of the reconciliation process. The Rules Committee didn't even allow our proposal to be made in order so that members of this body could vote on it, up or down. So, yeah, let's get on with the main issue. Let's focus on replacing the sequester. Let's do it in a balanced way. And I have to say, since the gentleman from Texas earlier referenced the comments of Senator Reid, the majority leader, I've looked at the senator's comments. The senator's point was the same one I'm making here, which is that if we're going to remove the sequester, we need to take a balanced approach. We need to include cuts. And again, it's important to remember we did $1 trillion in cuts, 100% cuts as part of the Budget Control Act. But we also need to include some revenue by eliminating some of these special interest tax breaks and asking folks at the very top of the income ladder to pay a little bit more for our national defense and for reducing our deficit. That is the underlying issue here. And I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Oregon, a member of the Budget Committee, Ms. Bonamici.
Gentlelady from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Congressman Van Hollen, for yielding. I rise in support of the Sequestration Transparency Act. We've all heard concerns back home about partisan gridlock in our nation's capital. Our constituents continue to ask us, is there any way to overcome this gridlock to solve the problems facing our country? They ask us if it's getting better, if Congress can actually do something. Can we get things done? And with the end of the year approaching and our country inching ever closer to the so-called fiscal cliff, the questions from our constituents take on a new urgency. They want to know what's going to happen if the budget sequestration is allowed to go into effect. And they want to know if Congress can function well enough to avoid the doomsday scenarios that many economists are predicting if sequestration does occur. And up until now, we've had to not been able to offer them much in the way of positive news, and we've had to tell our constituents that we're not quite sure what sequestration will mean for our community. Now, this bill doesn't solve the problems our constituents will face if sequestration actually goes into effect. the lost jobs, or the damage to our still struggling economy. But it does give us valuable information about what might happen, and it will allow us, the body that brought us here in the first place with the passage of the Budget Control Act, to at least better understand the consequences of our actions. And importantly, it signals a bipartisan action on the part of Congress to ask, how bad will this be? If there's a silver lining to be found, it's that we have come together on what could have been a contentious piece of legislation. And I thank the Budget Committee Chairman and Ranking Member for their leadership. Now, the fact that we have to pass a bill to get information on legislation that we've already passed does not speak highly of the process. The sequester was supposed to motivate us to work together and pass a budget that lowers costs while maintaining critical services. It's unfortunate that we have to pass yet another bill to move us closer to accomplishing what should have been done months ago. But for the sake of better representing our constituents, let's focus on the positive. Let's support a bill that gives us the information we as legislators need to make an educated decision. I hope today's bipartisan action is an indicator of a renewed commitment to tackling the sequester.
Gentlelady, another 1 minute?
15 seconds
30
is all I
seconds.
need. Thank you.
Gentlelady,
Thank you,
Gentlelady's
Mr.
time
Ranking
is
Member.
extended.
I hope today's bipartisan action is an indicator of a renewed commitment to tackling the sequester, and it sends a message to our constituents that we can work together to get something done. That's why I supported this bill in the Budget Committee, and that's why I'm asking my colleagues to join me in voting yes on the Sequester Transparency Act. Thank you.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to a distinguished member of the House Budget and Armed Services Committee, a gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Young.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Now, Mr. Speaker, there's broad bipartisan agreement in this House that the looming defense sequestration cuts are bad policy for the U.S. military and our national defense. Our Defense Secretary has testified to myself and other members of the Armed Services Committee that such cuts would hollow out the military. And our constituents are rightly concerned about our ability to provide necessary equipment to troops in the field, troops that are often our sons, daughters, brothers, or sisters. Now, the original goal of this legislation that gave us the sequester was to find deficit reduction in the federal budget in a careful, deliberative manner. And despite their best efforts, the small group that was charged with finding these cuts failed in the end. That's why we've passed legislation in the full House to replace the defense cuts with deficit reduction elsewhere. But the Senate has once again failed to act. As for the administration, it's failed to specify how these cuts will be distributed and what kind of impact they'll inevitably have on our nation's security. Now, military spending decisions should not be made in a vacuum. We shouldn't merely try to manage down to some predetermined, arbitrary spending level. Ultimately, strategy should guide these sorts of decisions. Missions we're asking our men and women in uniform to perform to keep our country safe should be our measuring stick, and we should ensure full funding exists to carry out each of these missions. Now, the bottom line is this. It's the responsibility of this administration to inform Congress and the American public of its plans to implement the sequester and to provide clarification on its scope and severity. With that, I strongly urge my colleagues to support this blessedly bipartisan legislation, the Sequestration Transparency Act of 2012, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr.
I'll stay on this side. I'd like to additionally yield 2 minutes to a gentleman whose primary committee serves the Budget Committee, and he also, I believe, is on the Appropriations Committee, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
Chair recognizes gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
I thank the Speaker, and I thank you for including me on your committee. H.R. 5872 is a bipartisan bill, and it did pass out of the Budget Committee unanimously, as has been mentioned several times here, and that's a very good thing. And I think, honestly, we have a very strong bipartisan agreement that sequester is a very bad policy, something that really shouldn't be allowed to happen. Obviously, I also sit on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, and so I focus on that area. And if we don't arrive at an agreement before the end of the year, we'll have $110 billion worth of cuts across the entire budget, but about a 10% cut on top of the $500 million we've already taken out of defense that'll begin. That'll have tremendous consequences in my state, potentially 16,000 jobs, $620 or $30 million to the state economy. And we all hope this doesn't occur. But we all know that the administration does have a responsibility to plan for it and to inform us of those plans. So far, it's failed to do that. It's worth noting for the record, Mr. Speaker, that we have dealt with sequestration in this House. We've passed a measure to avoid it. It's the Senate that has failed to act. Now, we may not have acted in the manner in which our friends on the other side would like, but the responsibility now is with the United States Senate to at least pass something and put us in a position to go to conference. It would be irresponsible to allow sequester to occur, and it would be responsible for the Senate to actually act. So I hope today, by giving the Senate additional information, by encouraging the administration to plan for something we hope doesn't happen, we'll actually bring ourselves a little bit closer to a solution, and we'll come to a bipartisan compromise by the end of this year. So I urge the passage of this legislation. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition?
I believe that the right's closed, so
Are you
no more speakers, right? Oh, we do. We have one more. You have any more?
not yet, but
Who seeks recognition?
Let me inquire as to the gentleman from Maryland whether or not they have another speaker or not.
there was one other gentleman who said he was on his way. He's not here yet, so if he's not here by the time you finish, we'll close.
Why don't I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma, a member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Langford.
Chair recognizes Mr. Langford from Oklahoma.
Thank you. At home, people have just a simple request of Congress. Just do our job. Just do it. They're tired of worrying about what dumb thing the federal government will do to them and their business and their family that will cause them even more pain. They just want us to identify the problem, fix it, and quit messing with all the private business world. When a private business sees a threat on the horizon, they prepare for it. If it's good, they ramp up hiring, they add more inventory, they increase training, they increase sales staff. They get ready for something good. They take the entrepreneurial risk. If they see a threat on the horizon that looks bad, they pull back staff, they slow down internal purchases, they freeze inventory and hiring. 2 quick observations. One is this. Right now, the national threat on the economic horizon is the federal government's lack of hurry to resolve this manufactured crisis. We need to fix it now. Second thing is this. We've got to look up and see there is a financial crisis coming and prepare for it. If we wait to the last minute to act, it creates incredible uncertainty in our economy, and businesses and families can't prepare for it. When we run all the way to the last minute and do something, we've already created all the economic uncertainty there. So here's what this bill does. It requires that we actually plan for an economic crisis that we know is coming January the 2nd of 2013. It pushes us to do what's essential right now. Federal spending has dramatically increased. As we approach $16 trillion in national debt and our 4th straight year of trillion-dollar deficit spending, we should not guess or try to just make up the financial plan at the last minute. Some propose that we debt our way into prosperity, or that we take even more money from one family and give it to another to make life fair. This bill just simply asks the President to let us know the plan. Let us know the consequences of sequestration. We know it's bad policy, but the administration has not given us the details of how they will implement the sequestration. Months ago, the House Budget Committee, then the full House, worked with 6 committees, create a specific plan of how we were going to deal with this. We just want to know what OMB's plan is and how things are going to be done. Get us the information now. With that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I inquire how much time we have left on side?
8 minutes.
8 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me start on the points of agreement. We agree with this piece of legislation. As we've said, it passed the Budget Committee unanimously. What it does is ask for some more detailed information on the impact of the across-the-board sequester scheduled to take place in January. The Senate also agrees with that. Let's make no mistake, there was an amendment on the Senate side, bipartisan amendment, Senator Patty Murray, Washington State Senator McCain, bipartisan amendment asking for additional information. There's also agreement that we don't need more information to understand that the across-the-board sequester cuts would have a very negative impact on the economy and on defense and on important non-defense investments that are important to the American people. So the issue really is, what are we going to do about it? And we have proposed an alternative in this House. We proposed an alternative in the Budget Committee. It didn't pass. We asked for this whole House to have a chance to vote on an alternative that had a balanced approach that included cuts, but also additional revenues from closing tax breaks and loopholes. We were denied that opportunity for a vote over here. Now, let's be very clear about what Senator Reid has said and what the President has said on a number of these issues, both the tax issue as well as the sequestration issue that we're debating today. The President of the United States has been very clear. He would like today for the Congress to pass legislation to extend tax relief to 98% of the American people, all the middle-class tax cuts. Get it done today. In fact, what some people don't realize is those tax cuts would also benefit folks at the very top. In fact, it provides tax relief to 100% of Americans compared to current law. Let's get that done. If we agree on it, let's act now. The same is true with the sequester. The keys to this lock are in the hands of our Republican colleagues. We've agreed that part of the solution is cuts. We did $1 trillion in cuts last year, 100% cuts. We've also said we can do additional cuts, but we should also deal with the revenue side of the equation if we're serious about the deficit. Now, the Chairman talked about our use of the word balance. It's the same use that the bipartisan commissions have made. Simpson-Bowles, Rivlin-Domenici, what they have said is that any serious, credible approach to reducing the deficit, and in this case replacing the sequester, requires cuts, yes, but also revenues. And the reality is, in this House of Representatives, 98% of our Republican colleagues have signed this pledge to this fellow by the name of Grover Norquist. And what that pledge says is you can't eliminate 1 penny of tax breaks. You can't eliminate $1 of taxpayer subsidies for the oil companies or ask folks who are making more than $1 million a year to pay $1 more for the purpose of deficit reduction. Won't do it. Nor does that pledge allow them to take a $1 tax subsidy away for the purpose of defense spending. So we hear a lot of talk about the importance of defense spending. We agree. Secretary Panetta's talked about it. We think we should pay for it. So rather than just talk about defense spending, why don't we also pay for it? We put 2 wars on our national credit card, Iran and Afghanistan. Many of us proposed that we help pay for those as we go, so we wouldn't be leaving the bill to future generations, to the children of the troops who are fighting those wars. We should pay for them. But no, those 2 wars went on the credit card. Now we're talking about defense. Armed Services Committee has a hearing today on the impact of defense. As we've said, we agree. We don't want to see that. But when faced with that simple choice, do you want to cut more tax breaks for oil companies or ask folks at the very top to pay a little bit more for defense and to reduce the deficit? No, can't touch that. So let's understand the underlying issue here, both on the tax issues at the end of the year. We can solve them today if our Republican colleagues will stop holding 98% of the American taxpayers hostage until they get a continuation of tax breaks for the folks at the very top, and we can deal with the sequester today if our colleagues are willing to take the balanced approach recommended by every bipartisan commission. That's what's at issue. Now let me just close, Mr. Speaker, with this. We've heard a lot of talk about how asking folks at the very top to pay a little more would hurt the economy. The reality is we've tried the trickle-down theory. It's in place right now. We tried it for 8 years under the previous administration. The last time we had a balanced budget was at the end of the Clinton administration, 2001. Then President Bush came in, back-to-back tax cuts disproportionately benefited the very wealthy. What happened at the end of the 8 years? We lost private sector jobs. So much for the theory that tax breaks for the folks at the very top trickle down and lift everybody up. They lifted the yachts, but the boats ran aground. And that's the reality. And that's what we're hearing from our Republican colleagues. So when it comes right down to it, we've been willing to make some tough cuts, and we're willing to make more. But because of this pledge or other reasons, our Republican colleagues refuse to deal with the deficit in a balanced way. They refuse to ask folks at the very top to chip in a little bit more to reduce our deficits and to help pay for defense. So let's take action today to prevent the cuts not just to defense, but to non-defense. It's interesting, I hear our Republican colleagues talk about the jobs created by defense. That's true. You know, building aircraft carriers creates jobs. Somehow building aircraft carriers creates jobs, but building roads and bridges doesn't. The President has a jobs bill. It's been sitting in this House of Representatives since September. Major boost in infrastructure. We have 14% unemployment in the construction industry. We have roads and bridges and transit systems in need of repair. The American Society of Civil Engineers has given our nation a D, grade D. So it's a win-win. Let's spend more there, boost jobs, the economy, do a job that needs to be done. But no. You know, cutting defense spending and work on tanks, that will hurt jobs, but it's okay not to fund the President's infrastructure proposal, to put people back to work building bridges and roads. So let's have a rational conversation, Mr. Speaker, here about what works and what doesn't work and how we can take this balanced approach to reducing our deficit and eliminating, replacing the sequesters so we can avoid the cuts to both defense and non-defense. I look forward to getting the information called for by this piece of legislation. OMB is actually already crunching the numbers. There are lots of details here, but our time here would be best spent putting in place a plan to replace the sequester rather than simply asking for more information. More information is good. Solving the problem is better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman closes. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have left?
2 minutes.
Okay. I'll yield myself the remainder of the time.
Just apparently I misspoke. I said Iran instead of Iraq, but in terms of the wars, but just for the record. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, if all this borrowing, taxing, and spending was the secret to economic success and prosperity, we would be on the verge of entering a golden age along with Greece. The so-called balanced alternative plan by the other side is balanced in that it does have deficit reduction of $30 billion according to Congressional Budget Office, but only because after the $55 billion spending increase scored by CBO, it has an $85 billion tax increase. If we keep going down this road, Mr. Speaker, we're going to get the same results. What did we start with in this Congress? We passed a budget that cut spending, that reformed government, that reformed the tax system to get back to economic growth, to put us on a path to prosperity to pay off the debt. The Senate hasn't passed a budget for 3 years. Then we engaged in negotiations on the debt limit to try and get a down payment on deficit reduction, and the Budget Control Act resulted. Therefore, the supercommittee failed, and the sequester is about to kick in. So again, we took action in the House, and we passed the reconciliation package to replace the sequester, which resulted in a net $242.8 billion in additional deficit reduction. We put specifics on the table, passed them through the House. Again, the crickets are chirping over in the other body in the Senate. No leadership from the President, no leadership from the Senate, no leadership. What this is simple. Since there is an absence of leadership on these critical fiscal issues from the President of the United States, from the Senate of the United States, at the very least, show us how this is going to work. If you're not willing to replace the sequester, tell us how it's going to be implemented. That is simply a matter of transparency. We're not judging the debate or the merits of each other's ideas on how to replace it. We're simply saying to OMB, tell us how it's going to go down, because this seems to be your only plan. With that, Mr. Speaker, I encourage all members to follow the bipartisan example that's been set in the Budget Committee, and let's have a nice bipartisan vote on behalf of transparency from the legislative branch. With that, I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 5872 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended.
On that, Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
So this is a 15-minute vote, this vote on the Sequestration Transparency Act. And this is the only vote on this particular bill. We do require, under the rules, this requires a 2/3 majority to pass. We had a chance a bit earlier to speak with a Capitol Hill reporter and learn more about what's going on today. Jonathan Allen, the senior Washington correspondent for Politico, joins us now from Capitol Hill. So, Jonathan, first of all, what is the purpose of the Sequestration Transparency Bill? And secondly, for those of us that have a little trouble with it, what does sequestration actually mean?
House Republicans want the White House Office of Management and Budget to give them a little bit more information about how they would implement this sequester, which was required by last year's Budget Control Act. The House Republicans and the President and the Senate Democrats last year all agreed to $1.2 trillion in spending cuts. If they couldn't come up with their own spending cuts, there would be an automatic spending cut. That's where you get this term sequestration. It's not the first time this has happened. The process was established by a 1985 budget agreement. Folks might remember Gramm-Rudman-Hollings, that phrase. So this is something that's not entirely new, but we haven't seen it in Washington in a long time. The Supercommittee's failure to come up with specific cuts is leading now, at the end of the year, if Congress does nothing, to an automatic cut that will be applied partially to the Defense Department and partially to non-defense programs.
Well, now, House Republicans want to know where the Obama administration is proposing to make those cuts, don't they? And why are they asking that question?
I think in part they're just not entirely sure how this process is going to play out and the extent to which the White House is going to have flexibility to determine how the law is implemented, which programs it will apply to. In theory, it's supposed to happen in a relatively even way across the various programs that are subject to it. Certain things were exempted. The war efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan are part of something called the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund. That's sort of held harmless from this. You've also got Social Security that's held harmless, and then limitations on how much Medicare cutting can be done. So I think they want a little bit better of an idea of what the administration's planning, but I'm not sure how much more information there is to give at this point.
All right, this bill requires a 2/3 vote for passage, which means, of course, Democrats would have to support it. Is that going to happen? And if it does, what are the bill's prospects in the Senate?
Number one, I think it's unlikely to pass the House today with Democratic support. I have not been polling Democrats, so I guess it's possible that it would. On the Senate side, I don't see any likelihood that this would move forward, and certainly, the President wouldn't sign this into law requiring him to submit another report to Congress. So this is really a messaging thing for Republicans. They want to be able to go out there and say that they've been pushing the White House for added transparency on these cuts. In particular, Republicans are concerned about the cuts to the Pentagon. So this is something to go back and tell their constituents over the August recess that they have been pushing the President to be more transparent, and he has been failing to do so.
And finally, former Vice President Cheney was on Capitol Hill this week, making the rounds with some of his former Republican colleagues and friends. What did he have to say about this defense sequester, and how did that meeting go?
Well, the Vice President's always been a fan of defense spending, and at the cost of sometimes of deficit control, but the Vice President also, I'm told, was giving sort of a layout of what he sees as the budget picture for the country going forward.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan Allen, senior Washington correspondent for Politico. Stay cool.
Take care.
And this vote continues on the floor of the House. When they're done with this vote, the House will move into an hour of general debate on a defense spending bill. After that, they'll get into reading the bill paragraph by paragraph and considering amendments, which we expect to go into the evening and then carry on into tomorrow as well. A bit earlier today, there was a House Armed Services Committee hearing talking about the impact of sequestration on defense. We'll show you some of that now as this vote continues.
back when I was younger, I used to coach like ninth grade football or ninth grade basketball, seventh and eighth grade. And there's a stunning dynamic when you get into coaching and you're coaching kids. You could be a coach and you see a coach, and they could be the most objective person in the world in analyzing their players and their talent. Then their kid is on the team, and they lose all objectivity, right? They think their kid's a little better than they probably are, so their kid starts and all of this other stuff. We all know that happens in the midst of Little League season. And I feel like my friends on the other side, and it's just stunning to watch this hearing, completely have a blind spot when it comes to government spending for the military. Now, I represent Akron, Ohio, so I have Lockheed facilities. We have lots of defense. We've got a lot of Tier 2, Tier 3. I get it. This is government spending, and it's creating jobs. And the scenario that we're talking about right now is that a cut in government spending is going to cost jobs. And that's why we're here, and we don't want to see that happen. And to have my colleague from South Carolina talk about, you know, the jobs in Virginia that are going to be lost, or the WARN notices. The WARN notice was put into law by an Ohio senator, Senator Metzenbaum, because of factories being closed down in the 1980s. So we know that, you know, what could potentially happen here in my district and in our state. And I just find it stunning that we can sit here and have a conversation about job loss and, because of these reductions, but turn around in the same breath and say that the stimulus package had absolutely no effect, didn't save any jobs, when the numbers and every economist basically will tell us otherwise. We need your help, because there is a narrative in this country right now that every dollar that the government spends is a waste of money, should be privatized, outsourced, done by the private sector, so on and so forth. Transportation, education. And I'm not here to lecture anybody, but I just find it stunning, because I'm in the Budget Committee too, and I have to listen to, you know, I just try to imagine if you were energy companies, if you were alternative energy companies, if you were a solar panel company, if you were a windmill company, and there was government funding saying we need to reduce our dependency on foreign oil, so we want to contract with energy companies and put up windmills so we can reduce our dependency and get out of all these entanglements all over the world. You guys would be crucified right now. Crucified. And I'm with you. I think this is a bad idea. I like the chainsaw with, you know, for a cosmetic surgery analogy. This is terrible what's going to happen, and it's stupid. But we need your help to say, hey, all government funding isn't bad. You can't just be concerned with your one little slice of the pie, because you're getting bombarded by a narrative, quite frankly, that's been created by the other side, and we all got to deal with this problem, I get it, but it's overwhelming. And now we're all swimming upstream trying to say, well, wait a minute, this funding is very necessary because it's got all these jobs, and here's the Tier 2 and Tier 3 supply chain that's going to be affected by this. And if a guy like me from Youngstown, Ohio comes out and says, well, maybe we need some government funding for security in our neighborhoods, and we need to fund the COPS program, or we need to fund fire grants, you'd be crucified. I'm a liberal tree hugger. Government doesn't have a responsibility to do that stuff. Security is security. And it's just important for us, we've got to get past this, because this is ridiculous. This is the end result of 20 or 30 years of bashing the government, and here we are. Sequestration, it's all coming right to a head right now. So I just want to ask one question, all of you, if you can quickly give me an answer, or one of you can speak for the group because the time is short. We are going to have to go out and borrow money to make sure that this sequestration doesn't go online. We've got to borrow it. So I don't want it to go online, and I don't think it's a good idea. Help me make the argument to my constituents that it is okay for us to go out and borrow money to make sure that these cuts don't happen. Can you help me make that argument? Why it's valuable at this point in a deep financial crisis that we're in? Why it's important for us to go out and maybe borrow at this time until the economy recovers? Can any of you help me make that argument in Ohio?
gentleman's time has expired. He made some beautiful, eloquent arguments, but you'll have to answer those for the record if you would.
Could I get those for the record, Mr. Chairman?
Be happy to ask the witnesses if they will provide that for the record.
Thank you.
Also for the record, this committee is the Armed Services Committee. We have the responsibility to look after the defense of this nation, which is in the Constitution. We have the responsibility to provide for that defense of the nation. So there is a difference between that and providing for cops.
Will the gentleman yield?
Be happy.
We also have a responsibility to provide for the general welfare.
We do.
I think when you look at the gentleman that Mr. Stevens was talking about, the young people that he wants to hire, something would tell
Reclaiming my
me
time.
that those
This is
are
not the General Welfare Committee. This is the Armed Services Committee. We have the responsibility to provide.
But I would just say, Mr. Chairman, we have an obligation to make sure that Mr. Stevens keeps getting those bright, intelligent people that he wants to hire. Something tells me that they got a Pell Grant,
Reclaiming
they went
my
to a public
time.
education.
We could go on, I'm sure, Mr. Ryan, for a long time.
I'm happy to, Mr. Chairman, if you want to.
But we do not have the time at this moment, and we will now turn the time to Mr. Garamendi.
I almost want to give you time to answer the question, but it probably won't.
Do you want to use your time for that?
No. We're going to have a written response, perhaps. Gentlemen and ma'am, you are leaders in America. You really are. You're the titans of industry, big and small, and you have awesome responsibilities, not just to your shareholders, but to your workers, and really to this nation. That responsibility is very direct in the military and the defense of this nation, as the chairman just pointed out. But your responsibilities, because of your position, go far beyond that. It really goes to leading and providing leadership. We've had some discussion from Mr. Johnson and now Mr. Ryan, and I think it's really important. I don't want sequestration. I voted not to have sequestration. But the real question underlying all of that is about the deficit and about the financing of our government. And it's either going to be cuts. You've argued against cuts in the defense industry. Okay. Then my question is, then what do we cut? And or do we raise revenue? And I want you to answer this question as a leader in America, that each of you are. Mr. Stevens, what do we do? Do we make cuts in other areas, and if so, what? Do we raise revenue? If so, where?
The very best answer I can give you, and I'm flattered that you regard me as a leader. I take my leadership responsibilities seriously. My board holds me accountable, investors, employees, members of the communities in which we live and work. We look to you, sir, respectfully, the members of this committee and the Congress, as leaders. You're our leaders. We have a portfolio of responsibilities in our company. That's my domain. I truly do look to you and others to wrestle with these incredibly complicated circumstances.
Excuse me for interrupting. Does your company contribute to political political action groups, and do those action groups express your opinion?
We do contribute to them, yes, sir.
Okay. For example, do you contribute to the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce?
We do.
Okay. Do you agree with their view that there should be no taxes, no tax increases?
We contribute to organizations that we think, in the main, express the view that we have, which I believe is the focus of the committee's attention today, on a strong national security. And my role here today is to communicate in my best effort the disastrous effects of a sequestration that will disable our ability to contribute to the national security, sir.
I'm going to just forego the rest. Unless you'd like to answer my question. The reality is three times now you've been asked the question. And I would just ask you to take up your leadership role beyond the narrow focus of your own company. You are leaders. Mr. O'Keefe, you were the leader of a major university, a very successful university. You have a different role today, but you've not given up your leadership role in this nation. You were Secretary of the Navy. We have a very, very difficult situation here, one that requires each of you, all four of you, and other leaders around this nation to really come to grips with the reality and put aside all the political rhetoric that much of what you've heard here, and help us. Yes, I do have a responsibility. I'm more than willing to take up that responsibility, and have, but you also have a responsibility. And I would ask you to ponder, if you would, that responsibility to speak out on this issue. If you don't want cuts in the military, then where do we cut? Social Security, Medicare, employment opportunities, education. If we don't want to cut there, then what revenues do you want to increase? And where do we do that? Or do we not do it at all? I'm going to let it go at that. I don't want to put you on the hot seat anymore, but I really would ask you to take up your larger responsibility as very, very influential men and women. Thank you very much.
Vote. The yeas are 414, the nays are 2. 0 recorded as present, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on H.R. 5856, and that I may include tabular material on the same.
Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 717 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 5856. The Chair appoints the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Marchant, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 5856, which the clerk will report the title.
A bill making appropriations for the Department of Defense for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2013, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read for the first time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Young, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Dix, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I might consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
This is the Defense Appropriations Bill for 2013. It has been drawn with the cooperation of the Republicans and the Democrats on the subcommittee. The Democrats led by Norm Dix, and I would say that Norm and I have worked together for so many years in making sure that these defense appropriations bills were strictly non-political. No politics in defense appropriations, and there should not be. Our investment in our national defense should be based on what is the real threat to the United States? And what does it take to protect against that threat? And what does it take to protect the men and women who provide for that national defense? And I want to compliment Mr. Dix for having worked together with each other so well, regardless of who was in the majority, for 35 years, Mr. Dix. And I just want to recognize this will be the last bill, defense appropriations bill, that Mr. Dix will preside over on the floor, because he is seeking retirement at the end of the term. This committee will miss Mr. Dix. The House will miss Mr. Dix. The Congress will miss Mr. Dix. And I will say the country will miss his service to the United States of America for so many years. So, Mr. Dix, I extend to you my very, very best and my appreciation and thanks for your friendship and your spirit of cooperation over the many years. The subcommittee held many hearings and many briefings on so many subjects that it took most of the year leading up to this date in order to do that. And one of the things, and I would compliment the members of the subcommittee because they were very attentive. Attendance at the subcommittee hearings, meetings, were all very, very well attended. The members were very loyal and faithful to their assignments and to their responsibilities. During these hearings, we heard one word that bothered me a lot, and that was the word risk. As we got into the issue of the budget requests, we were told that this might bring about a certain risk, or a prudent risk, or an acceptable risk. And we pursued the issue of what is an acceptable risk when it comes to national defense, or what is a prudent risk. Well, some of the things we heard, let me explain briefly some of the things that we heard. One, we are told that the United States is going to show a much more presence in the Pacific area. And I certainly agree with that. It's a very, very important part of the world, and we have got to be present. The other point was that as we did our hearings, we were told that in the Mideast, in the Persian Gulf area, we need a buildup of naval forces in order to do the job that has to be done, especially as we watch what Iran is doing, what Iran is threatening to do, and the choke point of the Straits of Hormuz through where much of the world's oil transports. Well, these risks, we think, have been met. But on the Navy buildup, the budget request actually would reduce the naval capability, the number of assets that we have. So we differed with the budget request on that, and we added funding, and by the way, with the support of the Secretary of the Navy, we added funding for an additional DDG-51 destroyer. In addition, Secretary of the Navy was really determined to build a second Virginia-class submarine for 2014, and it was not in the budget. But he convinced us that it was important to do. And so, beside the DDG-51, we provided the advanced procurement to schedule that second Virginia-class submarine for 2014. In addition, there are 3 cruisers that were about to be decommissioned. And for a lesser fee than decommissioning, we determined to keep those cruisers in business and keep them capable and keep them available for that naval buildup that our hearings told us that the Navy felt that they really needed. One other issue that I would like to raise is the Air Force, and we're not at war with the Air Force, by the way, but we have some differences. The Air Force determined to take away aviation assets from the Air National Guard in our states. And we heard from all of our governors, we heard from all of our TAGs, the adjutant generals, that this would really be crippling to the mission of the Air National Guard and the National Guard if those assets were lost. So we recommend to the Air Force, we provided $850 million to do what we call a pause, to let's get together and let's work with the states. Let's work with the governors. Let's work with the adjutant generals to see what is the right thing to do here and not deny the states the assets that they need, the aviation assets that they need. There's so much more to this bill The bill has been available online. The copies of the bill have been available. The lists of all of the issues have been isolated in press releases, so the contents of the bill have been available for weeks. And so at this point, I'm not going to go further into the bill, but I will reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.